Hello, I'm Craig Constantine.
Hi, I'm Lovelace Cook.
Hi, Lovelace. Thank you so much, as I say to everybody, for taking the time. I really appreciate you finding a spot in your schedule. I have one question in 37 parts, which is a movie reference. Um, when I asked you about podcasting, you said a new lease on life. And then so I'm wondering, why do you look at it that way? Did you get evicted, or like what happened to the lease that you had?
Well, if you may or may not recall, in the spring of 2020, when everything went tanked,
Kaput.
basically, right, I was working full time doing COVID outreach for the government, but I was also
I do remember
in
that.
my first Akimbo podcasting workshop.
Mm-hmm.
So the work was so intense, Craig. It was all consuming and took up most of my time, nights, weekends. And it was very difficult for me to get my podcast going. I mean, to really launch it. So it took another year. However, the podcasting gave me a balance in my life where I was exploring my creativity and thinking and writing. And I had this vision of what I wanted to do. So, I mean, I thought about the podcast in the winter of 2019, but when I say podcasting gave me a new lease on life, I was so busy with work and podcasting. I don't mind. I enjoy my own company. So I was at home alone and not suffering through the isolation of COVID.
Was I'm hearing in there a hint of like you've had a calling to do something before you began podcasting. And I'm wondering if there was something particular about podcasting that, sometimes you see something or you have an experience and all of a sudden you're like, now I know what I was stuck on. Like the thing that you've been like trying to untie the Gordian knot, then suddenly you find something that just makes it really clear how to slice through it. And was podcasting somehow a key to solve something that you were trying to figure out?
It's a part of it. Yeah. The podcast was going to be part of building a brand for myself. And where, if we can imagine a wagon wheel where the person, me, the writer, which is what I do, is at the center of the wheel, and the spokes are the podcast, a website, the blog. Just so that's kind of what that was the goal, and I was prompted to do that. I was had been deployed to Mississippi for a disaster to work, and I had a lot of driving to do, and I listened to Joanna Penn's podcasts, and I had already been involved with StoryGrid Publishing, with the StoryGrid Group, where I was working on revising a novel. But when I heard, I don't know, Joanna Penn's podcast just inspired me. I thought, I want to do a podcast. And it was a presentation. I wanted to take a presentation called A Literary Journey Through India that I had given in 2018, talking about books and books I discovered, people I met while traveling through India. And just, I realized that a literary journey through India just wasn't going to cut it. I come from a communications and marketing background, and I needed to come up with a, kind of a sexy name for my podcast. And so that it became Bollywood in Books. And people said, Bollywood? Why are you talking about Bollywood? Well, and then you may or may not recall, this is a rambling conversation, but in one of my many podcasting workshops in which I was enrolled, to get from there to here, Shannon said, "You said Bollywood, but you're not talking about movies." I thought, oh, right. Oh, gosh. Yeah. Okay. What do I know about Bollywood cinema? So then that launched a whole nother Well, it jettisoned me into another world. And I found that I love Bollywood movies. I have been loving watching these hysterical, some of them are just fantastic. I love the actors. The stories have so much heart. They're really just, the Hindi movies, the Bollywood movies they're great storytellers. But I'll slip back to right now. I am in the Writing and Community 3 workshop with another Akimbo group because I'm revising the novel that has been the never-ending revision.
I've heard that about novels. I'm done. No, you're not.
It is, it started out as a real journey, and notes in journals and photographs and thank heaven for Scrivener, which helped me organize a lot of disorganized material. And then it went into a memoir, and on a personal note, kind of a breakup with my significant other, who was a Brit, who had been my travel companion. I thought, well, you know what? This is my story. I'm going to make it fiction. And so I switched from, I don't mind talking about this, but I switched from memoir to let's just go ahead and jazz this story up.
Make a novel out of it.
And make a novel out of it. So I have been rewriting that. And in the Writing and Community, WIC 3, a couple of times a week, I'm in the Right Now sessions, which I did this morning. That's when I said I was busy. From 9:30 to 10:30, I wrote in community, and where we also shared with a couple of people what we were working on. And then right after that, from 10:30 until 11, we had an out loud session in which I read for 5 minutes aloud. The first time I was exhausted. Now I'm becoming much more comfortable reading aloud from my own material. I was surprised because having a podcast, I didn't think it would be any big deal to read aloud from what I'm rewriting. So that's kind of, and then after this, at 1:00, I have a Story Grid meeting about what's going to happen with the Story Grid Guild next year. And then we've got Seth's group. Seth is doing a 3:00 session for the Writing and Community group. So it's just a busy day. Plus I'm rewriting. And by the way, editing a new episode for my podcast.
So you're just sitting around doing nothing.
Just sitting around, not doing a thing.
I think we have identified the problem here.
We have. I thought, but this morning after I finished the hour and a half with my cohort in WIC 3, I felt so happy. It's been a month, a little over a month since I left the chaos of my job, and detoxing from the dysfunction has been a challenge. I was tired emotionally, physically.
You mentioned the challenge or the difficulty, the physical difficulty of reading, converting written stuff into spoken. And that's interesting to me. I'm wondering if you have any insight as to why, and maybe is it because you wrote it? Like, does that make it harder?
No.
Or is it just any written word?
No. It was just the first experience the first time I read aloud, when I was reading face to face with a couple of other people. It was tiring. I don't know why, but it's not that way anymore. There's a level of comfort that I don't really understand it, because I don't mind doing a podcast. I don't mind videoing, but this was a little different. And at the same time, in my writing, as I revise, I'm very conscious of trying to make sure that the sentences are not cumbersome. I'm not a literary writer. I'm writing to entertain. I'm writing in hopes that I can encourage people to change or to open their minds. So I want to make my writing really accessible and have a goal in mind of recording it myself to do an audiobook.
When you do podcast episodes, are you doing mostly host on mic, or are you doing a mostly conversations, or like what's the format that feels most comfortable for you?
Well, they both do. It takes a lot more work to do host on mic because I have to write a script and make it a story. But I just finished an interview with an Indian American author, Veena Rao, about her book Purple Lotus, which is garnered a lot of awards, and it was a great interview. She's a wonderful person. I do enjoy the writing of a podcast, and what I've been doing with the podcast where I've done host on mic, I've taken some episodes from my novel and kind of expanded them into maybe a 10-minute recording. My podcast is evolving, and it's not what I started out to do.
Well, that's probably a good thing.
I think it's just fine. It's turning into I'm meeting and finding all these really fascinating Indian American authors who I'm fascinated with the cultural differences. The difference between coming from a patriarchal society where there are arranged marriages to the Western culture, which is far more permissive, liberal. And some of the topics of the books, it was not, in fact, someone asked me, are you writing about this? And I said, no, but some of the topics or the themes of the books have to do with domestic abuse, in arranged marriages, and how women overcome the difficulties or gain a sense of self-worth after being in abusive marriages. That was not intended. My goal was to talk with Indian American authors and discuss the differences in culture and the difficulty in transitioning. If their home's in India or they've grown up with the culture that has been ingrained in this patriarchal society where people don't question values, family values, to America and then go back and forth. How is it? How does it feel? And how is it informing their writing? So that's been, there are a couple of authors I'm trying to get to talk with.
Well, I know sounds like you're just beginning to dive into that, but that begs the question, what are the differences? Like, how does it work for them when they go back and forth between the culture? Like, have you found any insights into those questions at this point?
It's early days.
Rats.
I really wish, I'm trying to kind of press for that without being intrusive because
try to be mindful.
Yeah, I'm trying to be mindful. There are a couple of people I've talked with, and just that I'm another Indian American author I'm going to interview, but I can't talk about her novel. So that's going. We're going to talk around that.
The elephant in the room. That's always a little hard, but
it'll be interesting. But she's an intriguing person.
Yeah, I think a lot of the really good work comes out of, maybe the hurdles or the problems aren't necessarily, let's make this hard for ourselves. The challenges can be real. Like there's an embargo on this thing. We can't talk about it. But a lot of times when you're forced to create in a smaller box, then, you get pretty creative. Like, how can we get all this furniture in this tiny room? We're like, well, what if we put it on top of each? What if we built a loft and put the bed above the desk? And I think there's an interesting, you're like being set up for success, or you're setting yourself up for success by, going straight at this challenging, I'm going to talk to these types of people who have these types of books. And I'm guessing by their very nature, they would tend to be a little like to play their cards a little closer to the vest and to be a little more careful about what they want to say and who they want to say it to. And you're pointing a microphone at me. So I think I think if you keep at it, just from what I know about you, I think you're going to wind up coming up with some really good lessons and some really interesting material.
Well, I will say that in my most recent interview, Vina told me, that an immigrant who comes to this country expects to fail, and they're going to persist, and that's what she did. She actually started a newspaper. The first Indian American woman, or the first Indian woman to start a newspaper outside of India. So, yes, I'm pressing to try to find. That was a difficult transition. She's going back to India today, I think, and they're going back. People are going back and forth to deal with deal with family issues,
right.
Life, exactly. Yeah. When life gets in the way.
Here's a random sounding question for you. If you could imagine you wake up tomorrow morning and a miracle has occurred. I mean, you don't have to explain the miracle to me or even tell me what changed. But what I want to know is, after the miracle that you're imagining happens, what does the world look like from your point of view after the miracle?
It looks like I'm in Cornwall.
Why? I'm like, I don't think I've been to Cornwall. What's up with Cornwall?
I think I'm somewhere around St. Ives. I don't know. Just kind of an arty community, and watching the water, and thinking about Van Morrison, and listening to some good music and writing, and in a beautiful part of the world. And I might be on my way to India pretty soon.
Nice. I was just going to say, I think it was Yuval Hari, I might have the name wrong, who said something like, sometimes I see birds in trees and I wonder if they can fly anywhere in the world. Why do they stay in one place? And then I ask myself that same question. So I was just going to say, well, why don't you go to Cornwall? But you're clearly already planning on adventures in the real world.
We hope. Yeah. We hope.
Yeah, I never want to jinx it. I don't want to say all is good, and then oops, I'm sequestered. Like I was around somebody who has subsequently been diagnosed. I haven't been diagnosed, but wait 2 weeks and then find out. Okay. Yeah, well, I'm not too worried about it. I'm vaccinated. It's not a big deal, but it's you never know. Like one day it's fine, and the next day it's oh, by the way, you were around me on Saturday. Just rats. So we're using it as an excuse to go through all the food in the house. No going outside. Oh, anyway. Well, let's see. Far-ranging and 18 minutes gone. Anything else spring to mind for you in the last couple of minutes?
I feel so grateful for the workshops, for all of the Akimbo workshops, but especially for the people, the community. You're my people now.
Isn't that funny? A bunch of people from all over the world, right?
All over the world. And the same in a way with StoryGrid, but I think the Akimbo community has a different mission. And I've learned so much. The whole idea of generosity. I have found that people are surprised when I offer something. And then I also, when I give without asking for anything in return, people are surprised. And I also see how in some instances where I might ask someone for information who's not a part of Akimbo or this group, who holds things tightly close to their chest, who is not afraid.
Knowledge is power. Yes.
Yeah. I don't want to go over, but can I share just one thing?
Sure.
There's a very good podcaster, and she's an audiobook narrator, and her son built her a sound booth. She was a journalist. She has a very, very nice little Newman, microphone, and everything is very clever. We started our podcast right about the same time, and I wanted to ask her for just some tips. And basically, she told me to podcast under a blanket. And I looked at, on Audible, I mean, I looked at her reel to see her demo reel because I want to learn how to do audio recording. Mm-hmm. And she's an audiobook narrator as well. And I thought, oh, well, look at her equipment. Look at her reel. This was real easy to have said, well, just take a look at my reel, or this is the equipment I have. This is what my son did for me. But, get under a blanket. I mean, I may be exaggerating to some degree, but that's the way it came up.
People do that. I have people do record podcasts under a blanket. And if anybody's listening going, what? It turns out that a lot of the junky noise comes from the rest of your room, the sound of your voice going to the left or bouncing off your computer and then getting to the mic. So if you go under a blanket, it cuts down a lot of the room noise. But it's also hot and sweaty and uncomfortable and stuff. So there are lots of tips. But
I understood the tip. I just thought it was insulting.
Yeah, there are so many. I'm the other way. People ask me.
Oh, no, it was just
people ask me questions and I'm like, here's 83 rabbit holes. And then they're like, oh, stop, Craig. That's too much. So yeah. Well, everybody's different. All right. Well, as much as I hate to say it, Lovelace, I think that's a good place to stop. Thanks for taking the time. It's my pleasure to have you for a little chat today.
Thank you, Craig. I appreciate your taking the time.